Thank you for joining us today on our commentary review of Part 2, Chapter 3, which is our 6th episode of motivational reading for How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. So today we studied principle number 3. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. So Mr. Carnegie starts off with this title in the chapter: If you don't do this, you are heading for trouble. In the beginning of the chapter, we find the story of Jim Farley and his success story. Jim Farley, who ended up becoming the president of the Democratic National Convention and the Postmaster General. Jim had no formal education, no high school, no formal college education, but he had a natural flair for making people like him. And by the time he was 46 years old, he had 4 different universities give him honorary degrees, and he was the president of the DNC at that time. Mr. Carnegie had the opportunity to interview Jim Farley, and when he asked him what is the secret to his success, a really interesting fact was brought to light through that conversation. Mr. Carnegie found that Jim Farley could call 50,000 people by their names, their first names. 50,000, that's a lot to remember. But that was what he called one of his secrets to success. Jim went on to lead Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1932 campaign and put him in the White House. So how did he memorize all those names? Well, Jim Farley had a method for remembering names, and he said it was a quite simple method, and I want to share that with you here. His method for all new acquaintances was that he gathered their full names and some facts about their family, business, and political opinions. And to follow up, he would write them personally and address them in the letter by their first names. There's an interesting section that I want to read, quoting the text inside of Mr. Carnegie's book. Word for word, I'd like to quote it. Jim Farley discovered early in life that the average person is more interested in his or her own name than in all the other names on earth put together. Remember that name and call it easily, and you have paid a subtle and very effective compliment. But forget it or misspell it, and you have placed yourself at a sharp disadvantage. Have you had that experience recently, where you couldn't remember someone's name? What did you do in that situation? I usually, if I have someone with me, like a family member, wife, one of my sons, I'll ask them to introduce themselves and get that person to say their name, and then that's kind of a sneaky way, I know, but that's just one of my little tricks I'll share with you right there. So that's a good segue on to the next topic. How do you try to remember others' names? So I told you a sneaky way that I'll try to gather the information back that I should not have forgotten in the first place. But first I'm going to share 3 examples with you that I've used. I lived a long time and worked in Japan. And in Japan, pretty much everyone has a business card. And they pass it out. You could be in a meeting with hundreds of people, and within 30 minutes, you've got dozens and dozens of business cards. And it's really difficult to remember the people's names as well as who gave them to you. So what I would do, and I learned this from one of my senior leadership team that was there, he gave me this great advice that as soon as you get the business card, write a little small note about that person on the back of the card, and try to do it when that person is not looking. So that's number 1. Number 2, I would imagine a picture of what their name sounds like and make some type of association with them in an imaginative form. For example, if the person had the last name Brownfield, I would imagine them wearing a brown shirt. A gentleman I met named Simron, I imagined him holding in his fingers a SIM card. So that's another method that I've used, is word association. And then the third tip I'll give you is I would write the name several times and sometimes make applicable sentences. Like the person's name was Jim, just like Jim Farley, for example. I would write Jim Farley, met with him yesterday, meeting with him tomorrow at 1 p.m. Jim Farley, meeting with him tomorrow at 1 p.m. Jim Farley, meeting with him tomorrow at 1 p.m. Write that maybe 5 to 10 times. I've done that on occasion as well. But I'm interested, what are some examples you have? Do you have any good thoughts of how you've memorized people's names you've come in contact with at social gatherings, business gatherings, community gatherings? Put some of your ideas and thoughts in the comments. I'd love to share those at one of the future videos. Next, as you can see here in this slide, I've got 3 long additional tips for remembering names, and I'm not going to read them all. I'll let you go ahead and freeze the video. You can take a screenshot, but I'll just cover the highlights of these 3 tips. Number 1 is repeat and associate. Repeat the name back to them in conversation. Number 2, visualize and link. So create a mental image and associate it with a distinctive feature or characteristic about the person. And number 3, use the name in conversation. Use their name a few times naturally. So just to review what we studied in today's chapter of the audio reading from Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, the conclusion here on chapter 3 is that the key point that we studied was, remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and important sound in any language. And just a quick recap on what we've studied so far in part 2 of this book. Principle 1 was to become genuinely interested in other people. Principle 2, smile. Principle 3, which we just reviewed the commentary on, a person's name is to that person the sweetest and important sound in any language. If you'd like to hear the whole reading of the chapters, go back to the channel, look on this channel's video library, and you'll see that all the different readings, you'll see the thumbnails in red for the full audio reading of the chapter, and the thumbnails in blue are these commentaries where I review with you of my thoughts and ask you questions on each chapter. And I'm looking forward to continuing this on with you guys. This is probably going to continue into the summer. This is April 28th, 2024. Thank you.